know that experience is shared by so many across our communities in this country. To this day, I still drive my only car, a truck, a Toyota Tundra, that I purchased along with my first home just a few years ago. Now, I tell people in my district that I have a car, a house, and a dog. That's how they know I've made it. Because in New Mexico, those are signs of financial stability. Because believe it or not, these things are still out of reach for most New Mexicans. These financial milestones are becoming out of reach for working families, and I know the prospect of retirement is even more daunting for so many working families across the country. Latinos are one of the fastest growing populations in the country, contributing to every sector of the economy and shaping the cultural and political landscape of this nation. In New Mexico, Latinos are disproportionately represented in low-wage jobs, making up 60% of those earning minimum wage, even though we make up only 46% of hourly workers. But Latinos are also so much more than just low-wage workers. Just like my mom, a single mother who was the first to earn a college degree in my family from the Instituto de Tecnología de Ciudad Juárez, and she became an executive working for a Puerto Rican bank in Miami. We're entrepreneurs, we're innovators, and we are leaders. Latino-owned businesses generate $800 billion in annual revenue. And what's even more shocking is that 70% of the initial funding for these businesses comes from personal savings. Despite this economic contribution, too many Latino families and workers remain excluded from the very financial systems meant to provide stability in retirement. And undocumented Latino workers face even more unique challenges and don't get the credit they deserve for powering our nation's economy. They pay billions in taxes every year, yet they're ineligible for Social Security benefits and often have little to no retirement savings after years and years of toiling in this country and dedicating their life to their families and to their communities. For many low-wage Latino workers, even those eligible for benefits, the struggle to save is real. Living paycheck to paycheck leaves very little room for retirement contributions, and limited access to banking services and financial literacy programs only widens the gap. Just like healthcare and other topics and other issues, we rarely talk about retirement within our own families, let alone seek the financial products and solutions that help us transition into retirement. This is a conversation about economic justice. It's about ensuring that the same hands that have helped build this country, continue to help build this country, are not left behind in their later years. And it's about making sure that the future that we're building is one where every generation of Latinos can thrive. Thank you for your time, for your commitment, and for your leadership. Thank you to CHCI and the panelists today for offering their insight and expertise to this very important issue. I look forward to the discussion ahead. A big thank you to Julio also, a New Mexican who helped volunteer for my first campaign and helped me be here today. Thank you, Julio. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, CHCI. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Congressman Dave Vasquez, for the kind introduction and your commitment to this important issue. As Congressman Vasquez mentioned, I am Julio Chavez, the CHCI Finance Postgraduate Fellow presented by Bank of America. I would like to welcome you all to the CHCI Capitol Hill Policy Briefing Summit Series entitled Asegurando Nuestro Futuro, Stable Pathways for Latino Retirement. I am honored to be your moderator for today's discussion, alongside a distinguished guest panel that will be discussing pathways for Latino retirement security. This issue is an important topic, given that it is impacting many across the country. When it came to raising the discussion of this issue, I often think about my abuelos. My abuelos migrated to the United States in the late 70s with the dream of providing a better future for their kids. As they spent most of their life working, they contributed to Social Security, trusting that it would provide them a dignified retirement. They did not know about pensions or other opportunities for retirement. When both my abuelos and abuela reached retirement age, Social Security was their only source of income. My abuelo, Elias, spent over 40 years working construction and landscaping to provide for his kids. When he first started working, he paid into Social Security with the hopes of not needing to worry about his expenses when he retired. When my abuelos reached retirement age, they struggled with paying the mortgage on their home. Sadly, they end up losing their home because of the limited income they receive from Social Security. My widows relied on support from their children into their later years just to have their basic needs met. The story of my widows is one that many families are experiencing across the country. And given the complex retirement system we have, it will become more common as Americans reach retirement. Latinos are one of the fastest growing demographic groups in the United States, projected to make up over 25% of the population by 2050. As the Latino population ages, an increasing number of Latinos face significant financial security in retirement. This issue is particularly pronounced among older and immigrant Latinos, who are disproportionately left behind when it comes to retirement savings. There are several reasons for this disparity, including limited eligibility to participate in retirement plans, strained resources due to low wages, and access to employer-sponsored plans, partly due to exclusionary policies. The growing number of undocumented workers who are excluded from public benefits like Social Security further exacerbates this problem. If unaddressed, Latinos reaching retirement age face a higher chance of being in poverty and will struggle to make ends meet, which will have profound impact on their families and broader communities. I'm excited to have this conversation with an incredible panel of advocates and leaders who are actively pushing for solutions across a wide range of sectors. I hope this conversation we have today can begin to raise awareness on the importance of seeking a meaningful and dignified retirement for our communities. And I hope that we can propose great solutions to a looming crisis. So, going on over to our panel today, we'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker, is Angela Antonelli. Angela is the Executive Director of the Center for Retirement Initiatives at Georgetown University, where she works to improve retirement savings solutions for private sector workers through research, data, and technical assistance. She founded the State Facilitated Retirement Savings Program Network, which supports state programs managing over $1.9 billion in retirement assets. Prior to Georgetown, Angela held senior roles in government, consulting, and nonprofits, including serving as Assistant Secretary and CFO for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. She has a BA summa cum laude from Cornell University and an MPA with honors from Princeton University. Please join me in welcoming Angela Antonelli.
Thank you, Julio, and thank you to CHCI for hosting this event, which is such an incredibly important topic. And just on a personal note, when I was a student in college, my grandfather, one of the last things I remember that he said to me was, "Angela, please make sure you save enough for your retirement." And I tell you that story because my parents are immigrants, a first generation Italian, and the first in my family to have gotten a college education. Now, I am many, many, many years older than many of you in the audience, but that was something that really I remembered throughout my life and was advice that I really didn't fully understand until I started working at Georgetown and founded this center. Sometimes I think things are meant to happen, and it was 40 years later, and here I am working on an issue that I'm incredibly passionate about. And I cared for my parents. They didn't have much of an education and didn't know how to navigate the American system. I learned from a lot of other people and sort of made my way through it. But I took care of my mom until she passed away at 91, and she really didn't have any resources in retirement. But let me get on to talking about some of the challenges, broad challenges that we face as a country. I think the first biggest thing, and it's already been mentioned by the congressman and by Julio, the reality is we just have an aging population that's living longer, and that's going to present a variety of challenges. We're going to have a significant growth in our 65 and older population. In just a few years, more than 1 in 5 Americans are going to be over the age of 65. And nearly a quarter of today's 65-year-olds are going to live past the age of 90. And for many of you, if you're in your 20s, the reality is, given where we are today with health and technology, you have a very good chance of living into your 90s or living to be 100 years old. So, knowing what we know about work today, if you're going to start working maybe in your 20s, and you might work for, if you're lucky, uninterrupted for 30 or 40 years, you might retire at 60 or 65, but then you're going to live till 95. How are you going to have the income to pay for an additional 20, 30 years of life when you have to stop working. And the reality is we really have we're very weak with understanding the issue of longevity. We don't know how long we're going to live, and it's very challenging. But at the end of the day, to think of yourself now, but think of yourself as an older person and what kind of life you want when you live in retirement, when you have to stop working, whether by choice or by force. And we're really financially not prepared for that. The reality is Social Security already is a source of income that so many of our elderly Americans rely on. Already, 1 in 5 Americans. And for the Latino Hispanic community, it's significantly more than that are heavily dependent on Social Security. The monthly benefit on average is about $1,900, almost $2,000 a month. But the reality is for Latinos, it's often quite a bit less than that. It's 30 or 40% less than that. The 3 stools of our retirement system in the US is the Social Security system, which is sort of that basic safety net that's intended to keep individuals out of poverty. But then workplace savings and personal savings also play important parts of that stool to build retirement security. But when it comes to workplace savings, and we'll talk some more about that, again, most people either don't have access to that system, even if they have access, they're not saving enough. And again, the average balances that most Americans have for retirement right now is really quite small and isn't going to add up to much to supplement retirement, Social Security retirement. And then forget about personal savings. We know with student loan debt that's drowning people, even older Americans are drowning with student loan debt that they have because they're helping to pay for their children and their grandchildren. Too little saved for emergencies. You've probably heard the statistics. For a $100 emergency, a lot of Americans can't find the money to cover that kind of emergency. So that stool is really not a stool. It's kind of on the ground and it's broken, and even concerns about Social Security, and I hope we'll talk more about that. But who lacks access? So when I said workplace savings, so you've got Social Security, workplace savings is supposed to be another big chunk to supplement Social Security. But the reality is too many Americans, full and part-time workers, do not have access to a way to save for retirement through an employer-sponsored retirement plan. We are 15 times more likely to save for retirement if we have access to an employer-sponsored plan. The reality is if you don't get that through your employer, most people just don't go down to Fidelity and open up an IRA and start saving on their own. It's just inertia. It's human behavior. We just don't do it. It's in our interest, but we don't take that step. And we know also that large businesses versus smaller businesses are much more likely not to offer their workers a way to save for retirement. And then in addition, the workforce is changing. More and more workers are working as temporary workers, gig workers, independent arrangements. And they certainly are not a large population that doesn't have access to a way to save for retirement through an employer-sponsored plan. And so that becomes an even bigger challenge. So when you look at our full and part-time workers who don't have access, you add the gig economy onto that. When you think about 80 million American workers who go to work every day and work hard and don't have easy access to a way to help support them saving for retirement. Why does it matter? As I mentioned, the population is rapidly aging. In addition, heavily reliant on Social Security and what that means. And then all of the other programs that we know about in the federal budget and state and local budgets to provide services to help support elderly Americans who have insufficient retirement income. And that's in the trillions of dollars of additional expenses that we're looking forward to over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And another reason why it also matters is because saving just a small amount matters, and it really can add up to substantial income in retirement. And we have in Congress passed secure legislation, Secure 1.0 and 2.0. And in the context of tax, also tax reform, we've seen changing the Savers tax credit and making it refundable, so we now have the Savers match. But the important part is to understand, even if you're a 25-year-old and you're making $22,000 a year, and you just take $25 a week, $100 a month, and if you never made more than $22,000 a year, but you put that $100 away and you did it for 40 years, you're going to have potentially $250,000 that you could then annuitize and add to that Social Security income. And it's not insignificant. And the Savers match, which is so incredibly important and can really help low-income workers, help to boost that amount of money that they have in their savings and that ultimately can turn into retirement income. And then when we look at Hispanic households and the disparities, it's eye-opening, it's shameful, it's It's an issue that, we need to examine when we look at our retirement system and the inequities that are just inherent in the system. The share of Hispanic older adults are going to double. The mean retirement wealth of Hispanic and Latino households are just a quarter of what it is for white households. There's a significant difference in the rate of growth in retirement wealth. Over the past few decades, the wealth of Hispanic and Black households grew by 66%, while it grew 366% for white households. And then wages and access to ways to save are critical factors. Too many workers, again, lack access to employer-sponsored plans. And while almost half of all workers lack access, almost 2/3 of Hispanic households do. And when Hispanic households have that access, they are likely to save at the same rate as everybody else is. So increasing that access is incredibly important to help build that wealth. And we have some forthcoming research that's going to be looking at the impact of savings on by race and by gender. And, we see some positive bits of information coming out of that we're seeing increases in the amounts that are being saved in IRAs by older Hispanic households. So we look forward to releasing that work and that data. It'll show us some progress is being made, but there's still a lot of work for us to get done. And the decrease in wages has contributed to a drop in retirement wealth for Hispanics. It's the obvious. If you have less income, you can't save for retirement. And so the incredibly important role of the broader economy, wages and jobs and access to financial institutions are all incredibly important other dimensions that are part of this picture that ultimately feed in to our ability to build for retirement security. So at the center, one of our focuses has been to help open up the system and get more workers access to that through these state-facilitated retirement savings programs. We're really pleased in the early stages that we have 1 million funded saver accounts, 1 million Americans, and these programs primarily help lower income workers. That 1 million Americans now are potentially, they have savings accounts that they might not otherwise be saving for retirement 3 or 4 years ago, absent these state programs. And so we're very excited to be a part of that. It's not only these state programs and the additional million savers, and that will continue to grow, the 2 billion in assets, but we also see the positive impact it's had broadly on the financial industry, understanding that when you give low and moderate income workers the ability to save and you make it easy for them, guess what? They save. And now what's happening is the industry is now going after these small businesses and this population that they previously ignored. So not only are the state programs contributing, but we're also seeing private market, the adoption of more employer-sponsored plans, and we're very excited to see that. So probably over the past few years, it's more than 1 million accounts that we've seen open up by Americans who are starting to save for retirement. But I'm going to turn it over to Christine, who's going to talk more about that, and Carlos and Karen doing amazing work with deeper dives into all of these issues.
Thank you so much, Angela. Really eye-opening stats and figures for them there. As Angela mentioned, we are going to be speaking to Christine Chang next. We'll be hearing from Christine next, the Executive Director of Illinois Secure Choice Program. Christine Chang is the Executive Director of the Secure Choice Program at the Illinois State Treasurer's Office, where she leads the Illinois Secure Choice Retirement Savings Program to expand savings access for private sector workers. With over 17 years of experience improving financial health and benefits across Illinois, her work has included supporting free tax preparation services and helping residents across access stimulus checks and the expanded child tax credit. She holds a BA in cognitive science from Northwestern University. Go ahead and hear from Christine.
Thank you so much, Julio, to the Institute for having us. Just to sort of supplement what you heard from Angela, I'm going to speak about Illinois Secure Choice, which is a retirement savings program that our state sponsors, but as an example of a state program and state policy that is really helping to expand access to uncovered workers to really help mitigate some of the issues that Angela talked about. So Angela had a map up earlier of the United States showing that 20 states have enacted some form of retirement security legislation. 17 of those 20 states utilize a model that we call, for shorthand, auto IRA, an automatic enrollment IRA program that's facilitated by the state. And that's part of a larger state law that requires certain employers to offer something in the way of a workplace retirement savings option to their employees. As Angela discussed, why is it important to make this option available in the workplace? Because of that AARP finding that workers are going to be 15 times more likely to take advantage of that savings opportunity and actually put that money away. When you have it through payroll deduction, you make it very easy for the employee It's coming from their source of income, it's being moved automatically, they're not having to think about how much am I gonna put away for my retirement every single pay period. With the auto IRA model, in terms of which employers are covered, so I mentioned there's a state law that requires certain employers to make a workplace savings option available. We'll use Illinois as an example because I think we're fairly typical across the other 16 states. For us, we cover businesses that have been operating within our state for at least 2 years, that had at least 5 employees in the state in every quarter of the previous calendar year, and that don't offer a tax-qualified retirement savings option. Think of a 401k or a simple IRA, a private market plan. So with these employers that are covered by the law and that are then motivated to pick up a retirement savings option, with whether that's going to the private market to pick a private market plan if that's going to fit their needs, or their other option is to pick up the state-sponsored program. And so Illinois Secure Choice is the name of our state-sponsored program, but you'll see a lot of these other state names like Cal Savers, Oregon Saves, Colorado Secure Savings. Again, we have 11 states now that have programs up and running that are auto IRA model. So in terms of how the actual program works for savers, the idea is to make savings easy and convenient for these workers. As Angela mentioned, it's always been the case that a worker could choose to, apart from their employer, go out and go to a retail bank or an online bank, I guess these days, and say, I'm going to open up my own individual retirement account. But is that practice actually happening? It's not. And this is why we have a lack of, in part, why we have a lack of retirement savings sufficiency, why we're going to be crushed by this burden of the fiscal impact as taxpayers, as state, as people that really have to help support these additional services when a greater proportion of retirees retire into financial insolvency. So as part of the design of these auto IRA programs, we're taking into account behavioral finance. We're thinking about how can we use inertia in favor of the participant or the saver. So for instance, automatic enrollment, which is kind of part of the name of these models, auto IRA. Automatic enrollment helps obviously to push up enrollment. When you have to take an active action to opt out, you're going to have more people who are participating. Now keep in mind with all of these programs, while there is automatic enrollment, which we know is a best practice in the 401k space as well, an employee has the option to opt out. Even if they are enrolled and they later on change their mind, they always retain the option to exit the program to take their assets with them. There are some other elements too that help with this idea of making things easier for workers. We have, across all of the states that have auto IRA programs, we have some standard default settings that the governing boards of these programs have set up that are thoughtful and meant to help somebody really be able to easily engage with these programs. For a lot of our workers, this is the first time they've ever engaged with an investment account. So we have several different default settings that are there for specific reasons. So I mentioned that the vehicle of savings is an IRA, an individual retirement account. The default type of IRA that we're using is a Roth IRA, so one that's funded with after-tax contributions. This structure is important because some of our workers need the flexibility to be able to go in and take their contributions out without tax or penalty, right? Because the contributions have already gone in and been taxed. This helps some of our workers who face more challenges when they experience financial shocks to act as a pool of their own money versus potentially going with a more costly option. So that flexibility is important for them. A saver always has the option to open a traditional IRA if that's what fits their situation. The second setting would be in their contribution rate. So in Illinois, we're fairly typical. Our standard contribution rate is 5% of gross pay. So that's the portion of somebody's paycheck that's going to be set aside for their retirement. We also have an auto escalation feature. So every year, eligible savers are going to move that contribution rate up by 1% until it reaches a max of 10%, at which point it holds. Now, as with everything related to these accounts, because they're individual retirement accounts, they're owned by the individual, the saver can always move that contribution rate to whatever they think is appropriate for them at that time, just being cognizant, of course, of IRS annual contribution limits. But again, the idea that there's a standard rate that somebody can go with, we're recognizing that some savers are going to be more disengaged, or they're not going to know exactly what to do, or they're going to say, I want a more hands-off approach. So the boards have built in these very thoughtful defaults. The final category of default would be the investment option, which the default investment option for these programs is a target date retirement fund that most closely aligns to when that saver is expected to turn age 65. Going along with this idea of ease for the saver, the asset allocation within these target date funds is going to change automatically as that saver gets closer and closer to their target retirement year, meaning the saver doesn't have to lift a finger. The assets and the allocation of those assets is going to be adjusted for them automatically. The other thing too, of course, that in terms of the access gap, what you're seeing with these states, and we are a young industry, the very first auto IRA program was Oregon Saves, did not start until 2017. So we're still kind of elementary school age, if you want to think of it that way. But we're already starting to see how the retirement landscape is changing as a result of these policies being put into place as these programs have been implemented. Angela referred to this earlier. Within the IRA programs themselves, we already have almost 1 billion savers, over 1.95 billion in assets from a lot of savers who would not have participated in the market prior to these state policies coming into play. This is to the benefit, of course, to the individual employee, which, obviously that's really who we're doing this for, that we want them to be able to retire with dignity, but it's also felt on the employer level. This is giving access to a retirement savings benefit that some smaller businesses in particular have said, well, I don't feel like I can compete for talent when I have to compete against a very large business that has a very full-fledged benefits program. So this is something that we've heard from employers utilizing Secure Choice. This helps me to attract and retain talent. Then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, there's the fiscal impact. We're going to bear the burden as taxpayers when more of our retirees are leaning more heavily on publicly funded programs. What we've also seen too is that because our state law, for instance, reaches businesses as small as 5 employees, it really is dipping into a segment of the market that has been underserved today. If we look at the access gap, it's disproportionately affecting workers at small businesses, workers with low wages, minority workers, and female workers. So we're activating now industries that historically would not have offered people a chance to save in the workplace. The service industry, we see a lot of people, businesses within hospitality, healthcare, transportation, security, staffing, that are now making this option available. So we have a video on our website, ilsecurechoice.com, that features a few employees from the Deer Point, which is a Chicago downtown restaurant. And you hear one of the savers, Brian Rojas, say he's been in the restaurant industry since he was 18 and has never been offered a way to save in the workplace. And you can hear his excitement when he thinks about, okay, now with the introduction of these state policies and programs, somebody can retire being a food runner, somebody can retire being a server. He talks about it, this is his words, that this is a step towards equality. And indeed, I think that is exactly what's happening here. We're opening up the market, we're opening up participation, we're opening doors for workers and employers that previously had felt shut out of the program. So I'll stop there and turn it over to our next panelist.
Thank you so much, Christine. We hear, some of the work that's going on at the state level. We'll turn on over to our next panel here to see what's going on in the private sector industry, more specifically around the fintech era. Joining us here today is Carlos Garcia, founder and CEO of FinHabits. Carlos is an MIT-trained entrepreneur in the finance, and tech industries. He is the CEO and founder of FinHabits, a digital platform focused on providing access to financial services for the U.S. Latino community. His mission is to close the wealth gap in our country. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Carlos.
Thank you. I started FinHabits about 8 years ago because as a Latino, right, in growing up in the South, in El Paso, Texas, and Juarez, Mexico, I never had access to see how wealth was built and created. It wasn't until I graduated from college and I started working in Wall Street when I saw that there are actually a lot of tools that I've never heard of, right? I've never heard of a 401k or 529 or HSA and all these words. But once I was ingrained in the institutional financial industry, I said it would be amazing if we could develop a company that can help the rest of the country, in this case, the Latino, build wealth over time. And one of the ideas at the beginning was, how can we do this better? Because there are large companies, there are a lot of institutional firms that try to do this, but they haven't succeeded in attracting what we call the low balance accounts. And as Angela was saying, right, if you don't have a 401k, it's really hard for someone to wake up in the morning and say, oh, today I'm just going to open a Vanguard account. That doesn't happen. So that idea was, how do we make it so that Latinos, when they wake up and they say, I want to go to FinHabits and I want to open a retirement account at FinHabits. And it was really, really hard because we first started building through technology and data when we thought it was very advanced and easy to use a tool so that anybody could start with $5 a month. But what we learned really fast is that what we needed to build was a trusted relationship with the audience. and to build a trusted relationship with the audience. It didn't matter if you had the best technology or the best asset allocation or the best features in the account. What you needed to build was like a bottoms-up relationship across every Latino community in the country. And because Latinos are very different, and they speak Spanish, they speak English, they're first generation, second generation, college educated, not college educated, it became like a data problem. And for me, that was very exciting because as a quant, I thought that would be an incredible problem to solve. So we started building what we call an engagement layer across all these communities through financial education and content that was easily digestible, and things like, how does compound interest work? What is the difference between a stock and a bond? Why does it matter if you start with $5 a week when you're 25, or if you do it when you're 35 or 45? Just showing examples of simple math, it picked up and it started building a community that right now we have about 900,000 members in the platform, and our content is viewed about 1 million times a month. And this is all user-generated content. We don't have a production studio, or we don't spend money in video editing like professionally, right? We do it ourselves, and we do it in a way that people understand the impact of saving for retirement every week. Now, as of now, right, we can say that what we built is a large-scale managed account platform where you can open a Roth IRA, a traditional IRA, a brokerage account. You invest in a diversified portfolio of ETFs, mutual funds. But what's very unique about what we provide is the cultural competency that we include in the engagement layer, which is not just the language, but it's that weekly or even daily engagement. For example, our funded clients, they interact with us 33 times per month. That's something that you will never hear from a 401k company, right? They want you to come and see your statements once a quarter, and that's it, right? And don't call them, right? We actually want them to come to us every day, as many times as possible, so that the more interactions they have, the better they learn. So I think what we have now is it's a digital platform that engages at every level with every consumer. And it doesn't matter if you want to invest $5 or $5 million. FinHabits is attracting a large part of the Latino population. And the clients that are coming to us are clients, for the majority of them, are first-time investors, right? So the education part is super important. And the plan for us, right, is to continue to grow and to continue to engage at every level, at every scale. And I think what we've built so far, it's like a machine that it's training by itself with better engagement, because as we get to know better the consumer, we can now build that into the model. We think about AI, right? That's the LLM that we own now. It's a large language skill model of all the interactions that we collected with 8 years, right, over the last 8 years, that is very specific to the Latino market, where we can now understand and actually engage even better at every level in a personalized way. So this last few weeks, we've also launched an AI Emma, which is our a hyper-personalized AI agent that now interacts with you to build a financial plan. So it can help you understand not only about retirement savings, but it can help you understand like how much money you should have for your emergency savings, or how can you adjust your budget, or how can you eliminate high interest debt. So the goal is to build financial planning at scale, which includes, of course, retirement savings. And that's our path. Thank you.
Thank you for going on there, Carlos. I'm really excited to see the platform and where it goes from there. Speaking on really looking at the access to barriers and also looking at the issues around retirement security, we had Karen Biddle Andres, Director of Inclusive Savings and Investing at the Aspen Institute. Karen is the Director of Inclusive Savings and Investing at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program, where she works to create policy and market changes that help Americans save and invest. She focuses on enhancing financial systems to benefit working class households, particularly by improving wealth building tools like 401ks and influencing new asset classes for broader accessibility. Prior to her role at the Aspen Institute, Karen spent a decade at the Financial Health Network, consulting with financial institutions on products for underserved consumers and she co-founded the Collaborative for Equitable Retirement Savings. Karen holds a Master of Business Administration and a Master of Public Policy from the University of Michigan, and an undergraduate degrees from Indiana universities. Please join me in welcoming Karen.
Thank you so much, Julio. And thanks so much to CHCI for hosting this. I think I can speak for all of us when we say that there's literally nothing more thrilling than to get up and get to talk about retirement savings and retirement savings policy with so many young people. While we're on the topic of young people, if you have access to the thrift savings plan, I need you to save in it, like immediately. It's the best. I wish mine is not as good. My 403B at the Aspen Institute is not as good as a thrift savings plan. So you should go make sure you're taking advantage. So I want, on my slide, I kind of want to like step back a little bit. So there are lots of reasons to care about retirement savings and so many stories about grandparents and parents, and I think we all feel that in our lives. I want to zoom out and say that there's another reason to care, which is that we will not make progress on any of the wealth gaps that we care about, whether they are racial, generational, gender, or geographic, without the retirement savings system. I checked this morning just to make sure I was right, but right now the median white to Latino racial wealth gap is about 5 to 1, right? So the median is $250,000 in net worth for white, 50,000 for Latino families. And the good news is we know how wealth gets created in America. There are 2 big pillars. Number 1, home equity, close second, retirement savings. A very distant third is entrepreneurship in terms of wealth creation, right? So the retirement savings system is unique in its ability to expand access to capital markets, rates of return, right? It's not, in some ways, it's not really retirement saving, it's retirement investing. And it's getting that money into the stock market, the bond market in an automated, easy way. Christine explained that really beautifully about target date funds. This is what generates wealth. And I think that's another reason to be animated about the power of this system. So I wanted to put up here just kind of like when I step back and think about what are the things that we really need to do if we want to make the retirement saving and investing system work for everyone in America. I think we've got kind of 3 big jobs to do. There are other jobs. There's a longer list than 3. I think we all have things we would change about the system. There's a lot about portability and conversion to income, et cetera, but let's just take these big 3. I think the beauty of these 3 is that these would impact everyone in America. They disproportionately would benefit Latino workers. Okay, so the first one, I'm not going to beat a dead horse, access. If you take one thing away from this session, it's that we need, in my estimation, a national approach to ensuring that every worker in America can be automatically enrolled into workplace retirement savings. I'm a big fan of the work that Christine in Illinois and so many of the other states that Angela engages with and supports, what they're doing with automatic enrollment. Bad news for me, I live in Michigan. Michigan doesn't have a plan yet. A lot of purple states don't. We're working. Hope springs eternal, and the work continues. But if in the absence of a federal approach or a national approach, lots of blue states are going to have these programs, and red states and purple states, maybe not. And so I think that there are multiple routes to that at the federal level. Multiple proposals are sort of in the ether, but that is an important, what is our national approach to ensuring that everybody in America can be enrolled into workplace retirement saving and investing programs? The next sort of job to do is to think about emergency savings, right? And Angela, I think, shared the statistic. It changes a little bit every year, but roughly 40% of Americans don't have $400. By the way, $400 is not the target. The target should be like 3 to 6 months of living expenses, and I'm pretty sure that's more than $400 for everyone in America. But why shouldn't that be automated in the workplace just like a 401k is? It should be. There are a few different ways we can approach this. Some are sort of within the structure of a 401k plan. Some of them are outside. Regardless, I think they should be automated to make all the savings automatic. And there's a real opportunity for bipartisan work on this issue. The good news is, by the way, retirement and savings has been a bipartisan issue historically, even achieving standalone bipartisan legislation, which we know is rare. But this field has really enjoyed, this issue has enjoyed that. The other benefit to ensuring that everybody has access to fully liquid, not invested in the market, you put it in, you can take it out, put it in, take it out, it protects retirement savings. We know that Black and Hispanic workers take pre-retirement withdrawals from their 401ks or their retirement savings when they do have them. They take them more frequently and they take them in larger amounts. Lots of good reasons for that. But that's expensive. A pre-retirement withdrawal usually comes with a 10% penalty. So that's an expensive way to access your own savings. We believe that automating emergency savings, just like we're automating retirement savings, is sort of an important complement to the retirement savings. And then finally, the savers match. I think, Angela, did you mention savers match? Okay, so if you're unfamiliar, right, these are provisions within Secure 2.0 that repurposed the old savers credit into a federally provided retirement savings match for eligible filers. This is really a first, and it's really, if I'm being honest, probably a once-in-a-generation opportunity to get federal matching dollars into the accounts of low-wage savers. These don't go into effect, these provisions don't go into effect until 2027. This is an essential piece of a wealth building or an asset portfolio for low-wage workers in America. And I know those of us in the retirement savings system who see the potential for this system to work for everybody are pretty committed to the idea that we need to protect the savers match in the ongoing sort of discussions about pay fors and tax negotiations, so that we have a chance to implement this and get these funds into the accounts of low-wage savers. As you can see behind me, all of the projections, let's say over an eligible filer over 25 years of saving and investing, this would add about $65,000 to their balance. Think back to what I said about the wealth gap, right? $250,000 for the median white family, about $50,000 for the median Hispanic family. $65,000 over 25 years of working doesn't close the gap, but it's a pretty good start. So I'd say of sort of the big to-do list, I would say access, automating emergency savings in the workplace, and the savers match. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you to the rest of the panel. So right now, we're going to move into the discussion Q&A portion. For the first 15 minutes of discussion is going to be, questions me posing to the panel, and after that, we're immediately open up to the wider audience. Just for reference, once we get to the wider audience portion, we will have some microphones back here, so just go ahead and raise your hands. We'll be sure to provide you a microphone. But on that last note, Karen, you did mention that retirement is a bipartisan solution. So I think the question I have for the wider panel here is that what would a national effort look like to address retirement? Is it auto IRAs? Is it another platform that maybe we're not considering? Or is it simply savers match? What would a national effort look like to address this living crisis?
Do you want to jump in, Angela, or do you want me to take it first?
Yeah, you can go, and
Sure.
I'll follow.
Sure.
Because I'm curious the way.
Well, let me just say a few things. So if we zoom out, I'm a big fan of zooming out. Let's zoom out even farther, go globally. Let's go global for a second. The decline of defined benefit pension plans, right? Maybe some of your parents or grandparents had access to a pension plan. Mine never did, but some people did. That's been a global phenomenon, right? I think it's difficult to see a future where a sort of a defined benefit pension, right, that paycheck for the rest of your life that covers all of your needs, that experiences a resurgence, right? That's not happening in any other countries. Longevity, right? Human longevity is increasing so rapidly, it's unaffordable for a lot of employers. So I think we're definitely going to be in a world where retirement security comes from multiple sources. I'll say on Social Security, I think, I can't remember who said it, but Angela, I think that the median annual payout of Social Security is about $22,000. That is not a lot of money, right? So, and for about half of Americans, it is the only source of income or assets in retirement. And so it is essential that we protect this. This is an and, not an or, right? The retirement savings system is not a substitute. It is a package deal. People need the guaranteed income, right? That's the other thing. Social Security goes your whole life, right? Retirement savings, until we make a few changes or enable conversion of savings to income in really automatic, easy ways, they are kind of two different things. But I do think, again, that we have, there are multiple proposals for ways that we could expand access to workplace retirement savings for everyone. There's a TSP for all bill, right? There's Chairman Neal's auto IRA bill that's been introduced multiple times. Different ways that we could do this. That's the good news, we have options, but it is getting to a point where I think we're going to need to consider what that option is. I will also say on the savers match in particular, super exciting what's in Secure 2.0. I think there's a real opportunity to think about increasing the income threshold and the amount of the match if we really want to sort of make a dent in building balances for low-wage workers. I'd like to see expanded eligibility for that savers match.
Yeah, so, you know, off of Karen's bigger picture, what I would say is we do want to have more American workers have access to a way to save for retirement. There are different ways of designing that at the national level. As Karen said, you know, some of the considerations in the design of these proposals, Congressman Neal's proposal would be a proposal that basically sets a requirement on employers in the United States to basically essentially do something, which is like the state programs. What the state programs basically say to employers in their states, you have to do something. If you don't have a plan, you have to go get a plan. And you can do that in the private market. You can start a 401k, start an IRA. But if you're not going to adopt a plan of your own, then you have to at least facilitate the ability of your workers to save using the state program. Take that concept to the national level, a mandate in place, and then states and private providers. There's also consideration of is there an additional role of the federal government with respect to setting up national universal access? Do we ask Americans to send their money to a public federal savings account? Not dissimilar from what we see at the state level, but now we create that at the federal level, and employers and workers send their money to Washington. So again, there are different pathways to achieving national universal access. And I think that's an important, it's going to be an important debate and consideration as we go forward, as we see that we now have 20 states, we see the success that these programs have, the number of millions of workers who are saving and the assets accumulating. There might be a tipping point at which we'll see the federal government take action. I think it will be an important debate about what is the roles and limits to what the federal government does versus the existing state and private employer-sponsored plan system. And not surprisingly, I think if there are options that in some way would fundamentally change our existing private employer-sponsored plan system, that's probably going to create quite a bit of debate and contention. And then also Social Security, let's be real. Social Security is going to go broke soon if we don't do something about it, right? Either raise taxes, extend the retirement age, all of these things that Congress has not dealt with. We need to deal with Social Security. I think we all want to see that happen. It must happen. I think it's more challenging if they don't deal with Social Security to then set up some kind of more involved federal additional retirement system that sits next to Social Security. Because I think a lot of Americans will be like, you can't fix Social Security, so now what are we doing at the federal level? Not surprisingly, I set up the center believing in these state facilitated programs. I think they're a great mechanism. I think they can be part of any federal solution and should be if we're looking at expanding national universal access.
Thank you. Carlos, you're focusing on the Latino community. I feel like the product that you're serving here is one that's really needed. As you mentioned, there's multiple opportunities out there when it comes down to retirement savings, but you really bridged the cultural competency gap when it came down to Latinos. I'm curious, when you went about that, how has the engagement, coming down to breaking down financial literacy for Latinos specifically, had an impact on helping them save for retirement?
So I think the key thing, right, to get somebody to build a habit is that they have to do it 90 times. So when we first started, what we were seeing is that people will come in and start putting money in for a week, but that they will take it out. So because it's easy for them, right? I want high engagement. They can come to the app anytime, just like they can put money in, they can take money out. And that was a behavior that we didn't want to see. So we started building, we were forced to build engagement so that we could graduate them on a 30-day basis and then 90-day basis and then 1-year basis. And now we have these programs internally where we built different layers of engagement to try to avoid them taking the money out. Another thing that we did that it's also part of the engagement, it's offering different types of accounts so that we have an emergency savings account, we have the Roth IRA, And then some people wanted to have flexibility without all the complexities of understanding the Roth IRA or the traditional IRA. So we also have the wealth, like a traditional taxable account. So combining all these accounts into one app allow them also to understand that they have different buckets of liquidity. And once we introduce the emergency savings bucket, that has helped a lot to increase the longevity of the retirement savings. But it's a combination of multiple things. So it's every day we try to learn and innovate.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'm just thinking about like my own family, like especially like my abuelos, my parents. Like, finances was not discussed at the dinner table. It's not something that we easily talk about. And like the very fact that we're able to build that trust first in order to ensure that you put away your $5, you put away your $10 on a weekly basis. And then eventually long term, that $5 could turn into $10,000, $20,000 eventually over a period of time. You can use that to ensure to cover your other savings. It's really fascinating and remarkable there. Chris?
I'll just, one more item that was interesting too, that it's part of the behavior, is because they're contributing not to payroll, but they're contributing to their bank accounts, right? They're connecting the bank to the FinHabits account. We get to see also that income volatility where it's not that easy for them to say, oh, I'm going to just, the average contribution is $50 a week. Like that's what we have right now in the platform. But it's not that easy to just say, I'm just going to put $50 a week and forget it. Because there will be certain weeks or certain months where there is no income. So they can't contribute $50 a week. So we need to give them also that flexibility to stop the contribution while the money keeps working. And that also helps build trust in the platform.
Yeah, I think looking at that, like just without having really too many penalties, or I guess like really harms when it comes down to like touching the money, we need access to it. Kristen, I think you mentioned in Illinois, like sort of the program that you built in there with Secure Choice. There's not really like penalties for playing out the money because people are human. Stuff come up, whether it be your car breaks down, emergency expense, so like whatever the case may be. In terms of like trying to access and like really provide retirement securities for like workers that are in low wage sectors, hospitality sectors, and restaurant industry, what are you seeing from there in terms of like having them have readily accessible to auto IRAs and seeing like how their savings are growing over time?
Yeah, I think it's tricky because I think we've touched on this. A lot of the segment that we're working with and working to help bring into the fold, they're living a little bit more on the financial margins, right? That if they miss that one paycheck, a lot of things are going to go wrong. Versus there are other people in this room or that we know in our lives where they can miss a paycheck or two and things are going to be just fine. So we have this level of financial precariousness around some of our workers. So I think for all of the states that are engaged in this work, the idea of making the Roth IRA the standard default vehicle is to give some flexibility, understanding that you really can't make it to tomorrow if you can't make it through today. And that does really touch on what Karen spoke about too, is having that dedicated emergency savings vehicle is going to allow for you to save for retirement and keep that kind of a bit of a wall there to say, okay, I don't need to dip into that if I have another vehicle or a channel that I can go into. So it is hard for us. I think we do see a lot of transactions that are happening on an account that you would think kind of on paper, somebody's not going to touch this until they hit retirement age, whatever that is for them. We're seeing a lot of pre-retirement withdrawal activity because there are these financial needs that come up because financial shocks happen that somebody has to weather. And again, we would rather they access their own money in this format if the other choice is they're going to take on a high interest loan or payday loan or something else. So it is tricky for us. I think it's just inherent in the nature of reaching more people who are earning lower wages. There's this line that, is hard to kind of balance in terms of preserving the future, but still making it through today.
And I think it's also really important that, as part of these discussions, we see, another body of work on financial well-being and how it affects workers and when they're financially stressed, how it affects productivity. And, part of, I think, the work that we're all doing is around this larger sort of concept of overall financial well-being. And I think to the benefit is in not only the structuring retirement programs, but emergency savings. These are all things that can help ease that financial stress of workers, help them be more productive, and helping their workers. And I think employers are increasingly seeing that, which I think is incredibly valuable, and their willingness to adopt either emergency funds as well as retirement savings programs as well. I also think it's important for employees to be asking for these kinds of things. If the employees are asking for it, employers hopefully will be responsive. Obviously, sometimes it's a function of the economy and markets and the demand for workers and how tight the market is. But again, if more and more workers, you go in for interviews and you're saying, let me ask you not only about the salary, but what about these benefits? Do you help me save for retirement? Do you have any kind of emergency savings? These are really important things for individuals to be talking to employers about and raising their awareness about the importance of these kinds of things and the availability of these kinds of programs that can help make things easier for workers.
Yeah, I think making things easier, is really one topic that I feel like is just hard to access when it comes down to the complexity of our financial systems. But also when you have groups of Latinos, but not only Latinos, but we have subgroups in there where documentation is a big impact and also a big barrier for Latinos, whether it be trying to open a 401k account, an IRA account, or even just trying to have access to that. I'm just curious, both from Carlos and also Karen, what are some works that we're seeing around trying to address, this particularly vulnerable community that really don't have access or really have options to save for retirement when it comes to that point?
So the market that we cater to, right, is mostly our small business workers, hourly workers, and we built a process to help workers, whether they have a Social Security or ITIN, open an account with us and start, putting their money for the future. And so we don't make a distinction. It's just like everybody's welcome, and you decide how much you want to put in. We had to innovate and build to do KYC ML so that we can comply to the regulation, right? Or SEC registered firm. But I think that was an issue that we just have to fix. But from the perspective of the user, it's seamless. It has to be the same, and we educate them in the same way. And everything we do is in English and in Spanish, and that's how it works.
Yeah, that's fascinating there. That's one thing that just coming into just seeing a large proportion of agricultural workers and really just construction workers and stuff facing those barriers and just trying to ensure that when they get to that point with their retirement and ensuring that we have some sort of security option for them, they cannot contribute. Some of them are contributing to Social Security, but they cannot access it because of legal reasons. I'm just curious, going into a wider discussion here for the panel, what would a stable pathway to retirement security look like for Latinos? We do have 401ks as an option in our IRA, but really, many Latinos are dependent on Social Security, but what would that stable pathway look like for the future?
Let's say that we need to start with the current behaviors, understand the current behaviors of the Latino families where they're multi-generation in nature. So the parents may live with the kids and the grandkids may be in the same household. So there's different, the dollar that the breadwinner is making is going to get split into many different parts. So if you understand that part, right, then obviously from the beginning, it's already harder to compare to the traditional, American household that does not have that type of arrangement. So that's one. And then the second thing we discussed is that the income levels tend to be lower. So that's something that we try to include as part of our education of financial literacy, how they can be not just thinking about making money day to day, but to have a plan on how they can generate income at work, but make sure that hourly income is actually compensating for the skill set, right? If they're getting better and better at the restaurant or they're getting better and better at plumbing, well, they should be charging more for their hourly jobs. And that's what we do, right, to try to help them understand how do you actually connect the dots in the existing behaviors that we see today. In the next 10 years, I mean, it's hard to predict how these behaviors will change. But I think these behaviors come, for the last 50 years, they've been the same, right? So our approach has been, let's find their current behaviors and let's make the financial system that we built adapt to those behaviors, not ask them to adapt to the financial system, and see if we can make some progress. And we're seeing the progress.
I'll say that I think to a large extent, the path forward for retirement security for Latinos has a lot in common with the path forward for everybody, right? And I think in some ways it's like the final receipt for your financial life, right? If in order for you to arrive at retirement with a decent amount of money that can really allow you to live the way you want and enjoy life the way you want, right? There should be an element, by the way, of security and dignity and enjoyment, right? After a lifetime of working. Everything else has to have gone right in your financial life. And so your labor income has to have been enough. And the cost of living, and I don't mean eggs, I mean the rent, I mean the truck and the car, right? In the 97% of America that requires a car to live and get to work. I mean childcare, which is astronomical, right? The cost of higher education, right? All of these things are pulls on your cash flow. And if they exceed your labor income, now we're talking debt. And we're at record levels of consumer debt right this very moment, right? Because all of these dynamics have not been going right. And so these, when we try to, we can make these fixes inside the retirement savings system, and we should. And we also need to have our eye on these other pieces of pulling down the cost of life's big ticket items in particular. Yes, groceries, but also the big ones. So that we can free up some of that cash flow to pull into saving and investing. And so this is the question they always stymie. It's like, well, the path to retirement security is all of these things, and it's bringing down healthcare, and it's housing policy, and it's these other aspects of people's financial lives that ultimately end up in kind of the final tally of your retirement savings. So that's unsatisfying.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm going to open up to the wider audience here. We'll have time for Q&A from the wider audience. I think we have a microphone here, so if anyone has any questions, just feel free to ask.
Hi, Karen, your final answer actually pulled on a thought that I've been having throughout, which is the rise of credit card debt specifically. We've had so many conversations in DC, but then also at the state level about access to credit and access to the financial sector and banking and everything like that. But we're also seeing such a big rise in credit card debt. Like you have mentioned, where you're talking to a room of young people, and obviously credit cards are very accessible. So thinking about the future of both individuals, financial security, but then also our families and our communities as Latinos, what concerns do you have? And how do we approach that conversation around talking with folks about credit card debt, but then also making sure that we are thinking future focused on having an nest egg for our families and multi-generational families and
I'll say a spot where I'm optimistic on that front, right? So let me just separate, a lot of debt, consumer debt, which includes, right, credit card, but also medical debt and student loan debt. These are all, the stack of consumer debt includes all those things. I think a lot of folks structurally, because they cannot afford life, end up in debt, right? And some of those are policy choices that we've made about healthcare and housing, right? Some of them are. Some of them are not, right? Some of them are personal finance decisions where I think, and Carlos can speak to this, you said LLM and my ears perked up, but I think we're getting into a world of much more democratized financial advice and support where the combination of better financial data sharing and responsible AI can help you decide, here's actually the next best thing to do with that dollar, right? When you have cash flow to spare, I think there's a world of tools that are being developed right now that say, hey, Karen, like you have $50 extra in your bank account this month. We recommend that you put it toward your student loan debt or towards your retirement savings, whatever. But that's if I'm lucky enough to be in a free cash flow situation, right? If I'm not, right, because my labor income is less than my stack of expenses, I think that's the different story that is the harder set of challenges to unravel. But I don't know, you're the one with the fancy AI tools, Carlos. Tell us about what you do.
The good news, right, is when we started with retirement savings is that people are coming to us and they're saying, oh, but I want to buy a home, or my basement flooded and I can't get money from my insurance company. So tons of questions that they were all finance related, but they started coming from all different directions. And that was because we had some sort of trust relationship that we were building with each consumer. But all those conversations, we started looking at them and saying, well, we can't just spend time trying to fix or help them save for retirement when there's all these other 50 items that are in the middle of that. And one of them, it is credit card debt, right? So what currently the model, the AI model, is helping people understand that if you're coming into FinHabits and you're saying, oh, I'm going to put $50 a week, but you're showing up there with a 26% interest, where you have like $6,000 because you went crazy this last Christmas. Well, that is where you need to fix. You need to put those $50 towards that first, and actually you need to accelerate that because that interest rate is so expensive. It doesn't matter how much money you put in the retirement savings right now. It's always going to be a disbalance there, right? An imbalance. So those are the things that we do, but it's on a case-by-case basis, right? Not everybody. That's not the general recommendation for everyone, but that's how we handle it. But the good news is that's the data that we've collected over 8 years, and it's data different age, income levels, language, everything. So it works.
I'm just curious, how many of you, if you could raise your hands, had either in high school or in college exposure to financial literacy and financial education? Interesting. So I don't know, for someone, if you're going like this, what did that look like, T? What did that look like?
Not formal. I mean, like social media, TikTok, management, primarily formal age knowledge.
Interesting. How much is social media? How much are you learning from social media about what people are earning? Because they have all these things saying, how much salary do you make? And now I'm seeing things on Instagram where people are going around going, how much money do you have saved? And people are telling. I mean, this has always been really taboo for people to talk about this kind of stuff. But I'm really finding that social media, I mean, if folks can feel more comfortable, like trying to make saving cool, trying to be open and honest about salary, talking about what they've saved or not, instead of being embarrassed about it, just being sort of out there, I think that can have a really positive effect. So young people can really change through these new outlets the way we view our financial lives. And I think it can really have a positive impact, and pretty rapidly. I think it can be highly effective. But for folks to really sort of understand the power of savings, and you see again, the FIRE movement, right? Save early, retire early, and what people are starting to do and thinking about that. And I think that's an incredibly important force that we start to see happening and spreading through social media. So I'm just kind of curious, but I think financial education, financial literacy can have some benefits. I know that folks have different perspectives on that, and it depends on how it's delivered to you and how long that effect of that education is going to last. But I do think there's a lot that we could be doing much more. But I think social media is playing important. People historically have been so closed. People don't want to talk about retirement, parents, grandparents, they don't want to talk about it when they're older because they're embarrassed because of how little they've saved. And you should ask your parents if you don't know, like mom and dad, how well are you doing? You have money, they put kids through college. It's kind of like the airplane, put the oxygen mask first before you do it for your children. But too often that doesn't happen. And so, you get, some of the solutions, people don't have enough saved for retirement. So what are we seeing happening? You're also hearing more about caregivers and the cost of caregiving. Okay, let's be real. People are living to be 100. How old do you think their kids are taking care of them? They're in their 60s and they're in their 70s, still taking care of mom and dad.
No, I think this is a great point. I'd like to have one more question, Scarlett.
Thank you guys so much for being here. I just had a quick question. Because there's a rise in the gig economy, delivery workers, insecurity, and drivers. And often those are contracted positions. So I'm just kind of curious what your perspective is on that. I mean, also, Latinos and Black workers make up large parts of their employee base. So I'm kind of curious, about how maybe these state programs might work with contract workers.
Yeah, so for the state auto IRA programs, they're, I think, all open for self-enrollment, certainly Illinois Secure Choices. So you don't have to come in via an employer that's covered by your state's law. You can come in as just a self-enrolled saver. If you're otherwise eligible to open an IRA, you can certainly open one through your state program. I think that what you're asking to hits on, how does somebody who's not connected to a traditional employer, they are their own employer, how do they connect to a whole suite of benefits that have historically been offered via your employer? If that's health, if that's life insurance, if that's retirement savings. So I think that it speaks to a lot of things I think we're talking about is financial health is such a large multivariate type problem that you have to solve for. There are a lot of different elements that have to be looked at and considered and coordinated. And I think for gig workers, it's hard because they're on their own. How do you plug them in when they're kind of loose and independent, and how do you tie them together? How do you tie them to those benefits? So I know there have been companies that have been trying to kind of consolidate some of those things for those workers. I think it's just a large problem to tackle, as all the things related to financial health are.
Yeah, I'll just add that I think the state auto IRA programs, like the one Christine runs, are modeled after the British system, the National Employment Savings Trust. And they have they're one country, not 50 states, they don't have states, so they can just pass a requirement and boom, the whole country is auto-enrolled. They haven't solved for gig workers either, right? And I think the only country that has maybe made some progress is Australia, because they have a sectoral system, not an employer by employer system, and not like a national system. It's sectoral, the superannuation system. Anyway, all to say that this is a sticky wicket for developed economies and how we think about meeting the retirement and other benefits needs of gig and independent workers. That's I think the hardest problem to solve.
Thank you, everyone. So I think now we're going to move into the closing remarks. I believe briefly, everyone, starting with Karen, final remarks, closing remarks, advice.
I think you've heard us talk about the big issue, right? Access expansion. And I'll just make another plug for protecting and implementing the Savers Match. This is a big priority. It's a big opportunity to get it right for Latino workers and other disproportionately low-wage workers in America. And also just a plug for the retirement savings issue in general. Would love to continue to engage with those of you who are interested in it. If anything we've said is piqued your interest, not only about retirement security and the financial well-being of older Americans, but also some of those pesky wealth gaps in the United States, please join our world. Please come hang out with us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I would just say we're always trying to innovate on the engagement side, right? So if you have any ideas or you volunteer to do videos with me or our community, come to us, come to me, and we can start generating more content so that we can help our communities. That's how it works, right? It's our own voice that is going to transform the habits of the Latino community.
Yeah, I would say, for as I think dismal as some of the statistics are right now concerning kind of the state of affairs, there's a lot of hope. I mean, we're chipping away in different ways at this big problem. We're telling workers that have historically been knocked out, you deserve a chance the same as anyone else to build your future financial security. So do stay plugged in with kind of what's happening globally here across all these different things. And thank you certainly for being here, for your interest.
I would just say, don't settle for low expectations. Have high expectations for your future and your ability to live a dignified retirement. And it doesn't take a lot of money to do that. You could just put a few dollars away. And again, if you just start now and do that consistently, hopefully you'll go on, you'll have great careers, your salaries will go up, you'll have an employer plan, and you can continue to put more and more money away. But my greatest pet peeve is for something, for example, where folks will say, oh, Social Security benefits. Well, for people who are low income, those benefits on retirement, it's going to get them about 70% of what they were making when they were working. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. You shouldn't settle for that. The reality is, yes, we need to protect Social Security. We need to make sure and look at how it's effectively targeted to make sure that it does keep our older Americans out of poverty. But you deserve more than that. You deserve a retirement system where you have access to easy ways to save and it supports you, employers who are contributing to those retirement accounts. And you should ask for that. And you can do a lot through social media and in other outlets to go out there and talk about these kinds of issues, take the stigma away from it that so many people have felt about talking about financial issues and their financial well-being. But again, Don't settle for low expectations. You can, an average household making $40,000, $50,000 a year, I believe they can retire rich. They can retire rich, and they don't need to save a lot of money to do that. They just need to start early and keep doing that over time and do the best they can. But don't settle for low expectations. You can live a good life in retirement.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Angela, Christine, Carlos, and Karen for joining us today on Capitol Hill to uplift the importance of the Latino retirement security. As the Latino population continues to grow in age, retirement security is increasingly becoming an even more important issue to address, not only for Latinos, but probably for all Americans across the nation. And just seeing, the looming crisis ahead of us, I'm optimistic by seeing the wonderful advocates and leaders that we have before us today, that this issue will hopefully be addressed in the future. And it's something that should not be a crisis, but more of something in place that we're not only surviving, but thriving when we're reaching that point where we're retired. Thank you, everyone.